See, the North Pole is protected. The village we call the North Pole is protected by some special hot heat. There's a run of rivers going through the ocean that pick up hot water down at the equator, down around the tropical islands, and they run it up past Spain and England and up past Norway, and it comes up to the Arctic Circle, and there's a great big circle that runs around underneath the North Pole, underneath the ice cap, and it brings hot air, warm air to the village of the North Pole. And so the village of the North Pole always has the most wonderful climate. And the hardest part of winter, it gets down to about 30 degrees. And that's a cold day. And it's never completely dark and never completely sunshiny. So it's a wonderful place to stay. Most of the folks who visit the North Pole and haven't been there for a while wear jackets, they wear parkas, because you know when it's 30 degrees, that's kind of chilly. It really is. But the folks who have lived there for generations, who grew up at the North Pole, they dress like this because it's not that cold to them. But this warmth that surrounds the village, it also forms a dome. And have you ever gone down the highway and you saw waves of heat coming off of the highway? Y'all might not have seen that. But have y'all seen that? You get the same thing surrounding the village of the North Pole. And you know, bears, great big polar bears, 8 feet long, stand 6 feet high, weigh 600 pounds. They'll come up to this wall of heat and they'll look at it and turn and walk away. They could walk right through it, but they don't know what it is, so they don't go through it. And you know what else? This wall also makes storms, Arctic storms, flow over the village instead of through the village. But every now and then an Arctic storm will break through. And one year we had an Arctic storm up there that blew the village for 3.5 days. It rattled the shutters and it blew shingles off the rooftops and it blew trash cans around everywhere. It messed up the village, something horrible. And when it was all over with, everybody came out of their houses and started checking with one another. And nobody was hurt. There was some building damage. Like I said, the shutters were blown off and shingles were blown off of their beautiful houses. But there were no damage, really. But there's nobody hurt. But one critter got lost. One reindeer calf, a very young white reindeer, got blown out of the village, picked up by the wind and just carried off. Santa found out, he got very worried, and everybody went in search of this lost white reindeer calf. They had 3 sleighs in the air, so they were looking everywhere in the air, and they had people on reindeers and other sleighs covering the entire area on the ground. And people looked running around different places too. They looked everywhere for 4 days. They did nothing but look for this little lost reindeer. And then Santa said, well, we've got to start fixing the village. So he called everybody back in to start repairing the village and said, we'll keep looking for the reindeer. We'll find him. I'm not sure how, but we will find him. Well, while all of this searching was going on, way outside of where they were searching, a little white reindeer sat. He sat with a big wall of ice up behind him. And he was lost. And he was lonely. And he sat there and he was scared. And he didn't know what to do. He couldn't find anybody that he knew. There was nobody around. Well, just about that time, 2 polar bear cubs came running by. And one of those polar bear cubs stopped, and he tried to stop and couldn't, and he tumbled around. And then he came back up. And he got up right nose to nose with that strange, noisy little critter. Said, what are you? He'd never seen a reindeer calf before. And while he was trying to figure out what this noise was, his brother climbed up on that shelf, that ice shelf behind him, and he was just about to leap off and pounce, and he slipped and went rolling down the hill. Polar bears are designed to roll down icy hills. They are. Well, Mama Polar Bear took a look at what was going on, and even though she was a polar bear, and that was a reindeer calf, first and foremost, she was Mama. And she knew that poor little calf was lost and needed somebody to take care of him. So she adopted that reindeer calf, that little white. He was the right color, he was white. And she raised that reindeer calf right alongside her 2 polar bear cubs. And when it came time to teach her polar bear cubs how to fish, they dove right into that icy water and caught fish. But the reindeer stood up on the side of the ice and said, "What?" He turned around and went and found a tree to nibble on. There's not many trees up there in the Arctic, but he found him one. When it came time to play, polar bears are built for playing in the Arctic. I'll tell you. Polar bears are round, almost round every way you look at them. And they got short, stubby legs, so when they go sliding down a hillside of ice, they just lift up their feet, slop down on their belly, and go rolling. They can even roll head over tail. They just make a perfect ball. And when they get out on the ice, they just open up and just go sliding across the ice on the belly, and they think it's such great fun. But reindeer are sort of squarish with long legs and a long neck. When they start to roll down the hill, they go flop, 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 flop. They don't roll very well. And when they get out to slide on the ice, they got great big feet. And when they lunge out on the ice, he goes thump. His feet stuck in the ice and he falls over on his face. That poor little reindeer wasn't sure what to do. Well, it came time when they were about 15, 18 months old that the polar bear cubs had to go away from home. Their mama had done everything they could for them. They were rather large now, and it was time for them to take care of themselves. And so the one polar bear that was kind of rough and tumble, he left. But the one that had a gentle heart that liked the reindeer, they went off together. The reindeer and the soft-hearted polar bear went off together. And that polar bear loved to play. He loved his best bud. That reindeer was his best bud. And he'd do anything to help take care of him. Until one day, the reindeer wasn't feeling well. And he was just sitting there. "I don't feel good." And the polar bear wanted to play. And so the polar bear came over and put his nose under that reindeer's head and started nuzzling him right here in his neck. Now that's important, but you don't know why. You see, some reindeer are born with a knot in their neck, right there, underneath their beard. And when they get to be about 18 months old, that knot will swell up and get ripe. And normally it takes another flying reindeer to know when that knot gets ripe. And they'll go over and they'll nuzzle it and they'll be real sweet and rub it real good. And it will release a tremendous amount of energy and give that reindeer the magic of flight. That's why not all reindeer fly. Well, it just so happens that little lost reindeer had that knot. And it got ripe just at that time that polar bear wanted to play. And as that polar bear came over and nuzzled him under his chin, he released the magic of flight. That little reindeer that wasn't feeling so good all of a sudden felt wonderful. He felt strong. He was so full of energy. He launched himself into the air and rolled that polar bear over, and he found that he was flying. That little reindeer taught himself how to fly. Well, this was pretty good. While his brother bear was down there looking for fish, he would go up in the air and fly around and find him a new tree to chew on. He found food. Well, one day when he was flying around looking for a new bush, a reindeer trainer was taking out some student reindeers. What they do is they take 2 experienced reindeer and put 2 young reindeer beside them, and they teach them how to pull the sleigh. And he was in a training sleigh, and he was flying around just giving the reindeer exercise so they could learn what it's like to pull the sleigh. And he saw this beautiful white reindeer flying through the sky. Up where there were no barns, there was no people, there was no North Pole. He was up in the middle of the Arctic. He knew who it was. It was that lost white reindeer that got lost in that storm a couple years ago. He turned that trailer sleigh around and he put those reindeers to fly just as hard as they could all the way back to the reindeer barn. When they got back to the barn, he went running up to Santa and Marcus, who's the head of the reindeer. And Santa, I found him, that lost reindeer, I found him. And Marcus got him to calm down and told him found out where this reindeer was. And so Santa and Marcus took that trainer sleigh and took off to go find the white reindeer. Well, sure enough, they had to look around for a little bit because, well, the reindeer had found a new place to sit down. And they found a great big polar bear and a white reindeer sitting together in the snow. Well, I want you to know that if you have any questions at all about reindeer, especially flying reindeer, Marcus is the one that you want to talk to. He knows everything there is to know about any kind of reindeer. And Marcus stepped out of that sleigh and started walking over to that polar bear and that reindeer. And he reached out and tried to grab that reindeer, touch him. And that reindeer stopped. He put his head down and spread his feet. And he went, "Arr!" Well, Marcus was absolutely surprised. What was this? He'd never seen a reindeer do that before. And so he tried it again. He put his hand out and he stepped up to that reindeer. And that reindeer went, "Arr!" And then the polar bear got in on it. "Arr!" Marcus, what is this all about? I have never in my life seen this before. And he knows more about reindeer than anybody. And he turned around and asked Santa what was going on. And Santa was laughing so hard he had fallen out of the sleigh. He was on his back laughing so hard at what had just happened. He called Marcus back over to the sleigh. And then Santa went over and sat down between the polar bear and the reindeer and just sat there and put his hands in his lap. Well, I've got to tell you, polar bears are rather curious critters. And it didn't take long before that little polar bear, well, he wasn't little, he was 6 feet long at the time, but went over and started to sniff Santa in the ear. And Santa reached up and scratched him on his chin. Can you imagine scratching a polar bear on the chin? And then the reindeer got curious too, said, "What's going on here?" So he came over and sniffed Santa in the other ear, and Santa reached up and scratched him on his chin. And everything was all right. They sort of made friends with one another. And then Santa stood up, and both of them went, "Hurrah!" Santa said, "It's all right." He just put his hands out, and after a minute or so, they came up, and he was able to scratch them on the side of their chins, right here. And then he started to lead that reindeer over to the sleigh so they could take him home where he belonged. And that reindeer took about 3 steps and stopped. Would not budge, would not move 1 inch. He wasn't going anywhere. So Santa thought for a second, turned around. He went back over to that polar bear. And he started scratching that polar bear behind the ear. Just right here. Y'all ever scratched the dog behind the ear? That dog's gonna do anything for you then. He'll follow you anywhere. Polar bear's the same way. Just scratching behind the ear, and that polar bear walked right beside him, walked right over to the sleigh, and Santa and Marcus got that polar bear loaded up onto the back of the sleigh. And Santa looked at him and laughed. "You look like a great big snowball. I think that's what we're gonna have to call you, a snowball." And then he looked over at that other reindeer and said, "Okay, Bear, come on." The reindeer's name was Bear. Every reindeer at the North Pole has to discover their own name. And here we have a polar bear named Snowball and a reindeer named Bear. Marcus and Santa took off in that sleigh, Snowball on the back of it and Bear flying right beside it. when they got back to the village of the North Pole, everybody was at the reindeer barn. Word had spread that the white reindeer had been found. And when they got there, everybody was a little bit shocked to find a great big polar bear on the back of the sleigh. They were afraid of polar bears, but they found out that this polar bear had a wonderful heart. And wasn't long before Bear was about to be trained to pull the sleigh. He was going to be pulling the Christmas sleigh one day. But when he took off, Snowball got all lonely, and he sat down in the middle of Main Street outside the reindeer barn and just sat there and cried. His brother had left him, and nobody could make him feel better. He was all alone. But it wasn't long before Bear came back. And then Marcus got a good idea. He built a harness for Snowball. And he hooked Snowball up to a sled. And that way, whenever Bear was off flying on the sleigh, Snowball could pull kids around the village on the sleigh. And that worked out real good. As a matter of fact, one of the best sights you'll ever see anywhere in the world is to have Bear, a white reindeer, pulling the sleigh right next to Snowball, a great big polar bear, and kids piled on the sleigh behind them and having a wonderful time. It also worked out good when you get things like Apple iPods and Barbies and things being delivered to the North Pole for delivery on Christmas morning, because they would come in great big shipments, and they would pile them on the sled, and Snowball would pull that sled to the gift barn for distribution. He was real strong and powerful, and it was no problem at all for him to pull that sled around. Well, first Christmas came along, and Bear, being excited about his chance to pull the sleigh, watched how everything worked. And then the next year came along. Bear was scheduled to fly the Christmas sleigh. It was going to be his year. But he knew that because of the magic of Christmas, he couldn't do this. You see, what happens at Christmas is Christmas is born. We have what's called the Christmas second, and it surrounds the village of the North Pole. And a second becomes a minute minute becomes an hour becomes 2.5 days. Y'all have probably wondered, how in the world does Santa get around the world, all the way around the world in one night? He doesn't. He has 60 days inside the Christmas second. But Bear realized that if he was pulling that sleigh, he was going to be gone a long time. And everybody at the North Pole is busy with trying to get Christmas distributed, so nobody would be able to take care of him. So what he did is everybody sat down to the Christmas Eve banquet. So everybody had a good meal before Christmas was born. Bear got Snowball, and they left the village of the North Pole, went up to a hill just outside the village, and they played together as Christmas was born. And they stayed together outside the Christmas second until the next day. Bear had given up a wonderful dream because his brother needed him to take care of him. But then Santa found out. Santa knew Bear was supposed to be in the lineup, and he wasn't there. So he came over and talked with Bear. And as he talked, he found out what Bear had done. He had given up his dream because he loved his brother, and he didn't want his brother to be unhappy. And Santa realized he had a very special reindeer here, and he gave him a new dream and a new job. Bear now flies as part of Santa's personal team. And whenever Santa flies anywhere around the world, any day of the year, Bear's flying with him. And any other day but Christmas, there's lots of people there to help take care of Snowball so he doesn't get lonely. And Bear has his dream of flying Santa's sleigh every day of the year except Christmas. But that's how we got the first bear, the first polar bear at the North Pole, through the love of a brother reindeer. Now, I've got a question. This, you didn't know you were going to have to pass a test today, did you? But I've got a question for you. When Santa's coming near your house, how do you know that he's getting close? How do you know when Santa is getting in your neighborhood? You hear what? The bells. Exactly right. You can hear the bells. But did you know there was a time when there were no bells on the reindeer? There were no bells on the sleigh? Why, the only sound it made was when it sliced through the snow and ice on your roof or in your yard. But if you want to know how they got the bells, I'm going to have some help. I got something in here that y'all are going to help with. I don't know how. Now, what we're going to do is we're just going to let y'all take parts, and we'll see what we can do. Make sure everybody gets a part in this story, okay? Who's that? Who wants to be Santa Claus? The deal is you're going to have to hold up Santa when we get to Santa's part in the story so we all know that Santa's on board, okay? Will you be Santa for me? So you can just hold it down for the time being, but you're going to have to hold it up, all right? This is Natasha. That's Mrs. Claus. She is the most loved lady in all of the North Pole. Who wants to be Natasha, Mrs. Claus? Do you want to be Natasha? All right. Now, she's going to be busy here in a minute. This is Jasper. He's the cat from the reindeer barn. Jasper has a very important part in this story. Who wants to take care of Jasper for me? Now, this here is a young reindeer who doesn't have a name yet. He hasn't found his. You ready? You want the reindeer? Okay, that's fine. Now, how many more? Who doesn't have a part yet? Well, I guess I can trust the bigger kids with these knock them in the head bells. But the little kids get the bells that you get to hold. These bells are very important because we're talking about how Santa got his bells. Santa's sleigh got his bells. There's 2 bells.
I'll take the one.
Hold on. I think 2 works better. How about that? We emptied the bag. Just don't hit anybody in the head with those. They get to be lethal weapons if you're not careful. As I said, long time ago, the sleigh did not have any bells. But at this time, there was a young boy by the name of Victor. He was 6 years old. And Victor's favorite thing to do was to run through the streets of the North Pole. He would run like crazy with his arms out. And as he was running, he would run into people. He would run into folks who were working. And he would run into folks who were talking. And he would run into folks who were just sitting there and admiring the beauty. The North Pole is a beautiful place. The buildings are absolutely gorgeous. And you could stand there all day and look at them, and he'd run into these people who were just admiring the North Pole too. And then one day, he ran into Natasha. Who's got Natasha? Hold up Natasha so we know who he ran into. We ran into Natasha, Mrs. Claus. And Natasha looked down and said, Victor, what are we going to do with you? We've got to do something. She thought for a second. She said, I got an idea. Come with me. And she took Victor by the hand and she led him down to her house. And she sat him down in her living room and went looking. She looked through all of her cupboards until she found one bell. And she put that bell on a ribbon and she put it around his neck. So there, now when you go running, we'll hear you coming and we can step out of the way. Well, that worked for only a couple of days before that bell got tucked inside of Victor's shirt and it didn't make any noise at all. And you know what he did? He ran into Natasha. Get Natasha back up again. And this time Natasha was talking to Victor's mother. And what are we going to do about you? Victor, we've got to do something about this problem. What are we going to do? Just then Jasper, the cat from the reindeer barn, came up and started weaving in and out. Where's the cat? Bring the cat up a little bit. There we go. Now we can see the cat. He wove in and out of Victor's legs. Have y'all ever had a cat weave in and out of your legs and wrap around your legs? I had a cat doing that to me this morning. Matter of fact, I had 2 of them trying to wrap around the same leg. And Natasha and Jasper, you're absolutely right. What a wonderful idea. Come on with me, Victor. Come on, Mama. And they went back down to Natasha's house again and sat down in the living room, and she went looking and looking and looking and looking and looking and looking, and she finally found some more bells. And she took the bell off of Victor's neck and put it around his ankle. What does that sound like? Shake your bells. That's right. And then she tied the other bells around his other ankle. And every time he took a step, let's see if we can get this right. Shake yours, shake yours, shake yours, shake yours. One at a time. Shake. Excellent. Now, y'all remember how to do that because that's going to be important in just a minute, okay? 1, 2, 1, 2. All right. Well, that worked great. People heard Victor whenever he was on the move. And then one day, Victor was getting kind of tired, and it was late in the day, and he found out he was standing right there in front of the reindeer barn. And so he went through the reindeer barn, and every step he took, let's hear it. The reindeer heard those bells, and they thought it was absolutely, hold on, we're going to get that reindeer in just a second. Absolutely most wonderful sound they ever heard. But Victor was a little tired. He went all the way back to the back of the barn, and he found a stall there where a young reindeer was supposed to be sleeping, and he was outside playing reindeer games. And so Victor took advantage of the stall, and he stretched out on that hay and fell asleep. Well, it wasn't long before the young reindeer came in, and he stopped and looked and said, "What is this? Here's a boy asleep on my straw." And then the reindeer caretaker, the man who took care of the reindeer, came through and didn't even look at what was going on. He just threw another pile of hay in there for the reindeer. He thought the reindeer wasn't happy. And so he just gave him some more reindeer, completely covered Victor up. But the straw was so sweet that Victor didn't mind. He just went to sleep, continued to sleep, having great dreams. Well, about this time, Victor's mama decided it was time to come in for supper. Now, mamas, what do you do when your child's out playing somewhere in the neighborhood and you want them inside? And no, you don't have a cell phone. Mama stepped out and saw, "Victor! Victor!" Everybody in the North Pole heard Victor's name being called, and they stepped up against the wall. They figured that boy would be coming running through, and nothing happened. There were no bells. There was no Victor. And everybody began to get worried. Where was Victor? Everybody went on a hunt for Victor. Even Santa stood in the middle of the street and scratched his head. Now, where could that boy be? Who saw him last? Where is he? Well, Jasper knew exactly where he was. Where's Jasper? Jasper walked right through the reindeer barn to the back, and he went into that stall where Victor was asleep and figured, I need to tell everybody where he is. So he uncovered one of those bells, and he pawed it with his paw. Now, how far? Can y'all hear that? Not really. Why? How do you get noise or sound out of a bell? It's exactly right. Bells need to be shaken, not pawed. Well, he got an idea. He took the bells off of Victor's legs and he held them up to that reindeer. And the reindeer knew what to do. He leaned over. And Jasper held him up. And the reindeer leaned over. And Jasper tried as hard as he could to get that bell on the reindeer's antlers, and he couldn't quite make it. And while he was straining, he saw a mouse walking down the side of the barn. He said, hey, you, come here. Now, can you imagine a mouse and a cat working together? Hey, at the North Pole, everybody works together when there's a problem to be solved. Everybody. That mouse knew exactly what to do. He took those bells, climbed up on Jasper's shoulders, and Jasper stood up as tall as he could and held that mouse, and that mouse reached up, and that reindeer leaned down, and whick, they got the bells on the antler. And then the mouse grabbed the other bells, and whick, hung them on that reindeer's antlers. And that reindeer started to shake his head. Now, what do you think that sounded like? Shake your bells. That's what we had. We had the sound of bells ringing all the way through the barn out into Main Street. People came running in, and they saw this reindeer standing there shaking his head and ringing the bells, and no Victor. Victor's mama stood there and looked around. Where could that boy be? Jasper saw it, fixed it. He went over and he pawed the straw on his Victor's hand to show his mama where he was. Oh, thank goodness. His mama went into that stall and uncovered her son and lifted him up. And everybody was jubilant, happy, and laughing. They had found Victor, and Victor was okay. And Santa stood there because that reindeer was still shaking his head. And what was going on while he was shaking his head? Those bells were just jingling. He said, well, young reindeer, I guess you have found your name. What's his name? What is the name that young reindeer with all of those bells on his antler? Jingle's exactly right. Well, Jingles loved the bells, but so did all the other reindeer. All of the reindeer wanted bells, but there weren't but so many bells at the North Pole at that time. So Santa went on a search for more bells. And it was a couple years later, he was attending a ceremony on the feast day of St. Nicholas, the first day that Santa flies his sleigh for Christmas. It's December the 6th. He was at a church in France, and they were dedicating, with the feast day of St. Nicholas, they were dedicating new bells. And the bell maker was there, Mr. Hans Kinderjinkel. And Hans Kinderjinkel was known throughout Europe for making the best bells. He made bells that were 8 feet tall, 6 feet across, and made a big bong. And he also made bells that were, come here. Yep, just about your height. Short bells. That they didn't make a big bong, they made a bong. The most beautiful sound a small bell can make. But his favorite bells were little bells that you can shake with your hand. So when Santa came over and asked Hans Kinderjinkel if he would make bells for his reindeer, Hans didn't think about that fast and said, absolutely. But he made bells for the next year. He made bells for all of the reindeer. He made bells for the sleigh. And every bell was a little different, made a little bit different tone. So when Christmas was born again, and that sleigh took off, loaded with bells, it wasn't jingle. What did it sound like? What do all the bells sound like? It was a grand chorus of bells, an orchestra of music made by Jingle Bells. So the next time you hear Santa's sleigh, it'll be a couple weeks. Listen, and listen for those bells. And you'll know those bells are because a 6-year-old boy by the name of Victor did exactly what 6-year-old boys do. He went running through the streets. And now we have Jingle Bells on the sleigh. Did you know? Here's another one of these pop quiz questions. The sleigh does not take off until Christmas is born. He does not fly on Christmas Eve. But when Christmas is born, that very first heartbeat of Christmas at the North Pole, what time is it right here in Rocky Mount? Hmm? 12 o'clock when?
Midnight. 12 o'clock midnight.
No, I'm sorry. Anybody else got an idea? I'll give you a clue. You probably are not awake yet, and it is not Christmas Day. 7 o'clock in the morning on Christmas Eve. It's 7 a.m. on Christmas Eve in Rocky Mount when Christmas is born at the North Pole and the journey begins. We are 17 hours behind, 15 hours, 17 hours behind on Christmas Eve. Christmas is going to be like 17 hours old. They start the countdown late on Christmas Eve, and by the time they start the countdown, he's halfway across. When you're eating supper on Christmas Eve, it's 7 o'clock Christmas Eve in the evening, supper time. He's in London, England. He's made it halfway around, and it's going to be another 5 hours before he gets here. That's a long day. And when you stop and think that each hour lasts 2.5 days for Santa, he's traveling for 2.5 days in each hour block. That's how he gets all the presents delivered. Besides that, his reindeer are very, very fast. Oh, I've promised y'all 2 things. One is I started to tell you how many times the sleigh flies. The first time Nicholas flies is on December the 6th. That's the feast day of St. Nicholas. That's the celebration of St. Nicholas's life. The second time, of course, is Christmas morning. The third time is what we call Old Christmas, January the 6th. Some churches celebrate Epiphany. It's the 12th day of Christmas. And the difference between Christmas and Old Christmas is 12 days. So when you hear the 12th, on the first day of Christmas, my true love gave to me. You know what he gave to her on the 12th day of Christmas? A great big bill. It's expensive to have 12 days of Christmas. Oh my stars. And then you got to clean up after the geese and the ducks and the partridges and oh my stars. But that's the 12th day of Christmas, and there's a long story behind that too, but we won't go there right now. The other thing is the magic of mall Santas. You said you had been to see Santa at the mall? Who said they'd been to see the mall? When you go to see Santa at the mall, watch his eyes. That's the secret. As you tell him what's in your heart, his eyes will start to twinkle. If they do, he is a member of the Royal Brotherhood of Santas, men and women selected by St. Nicholas himself to help get ready for Christmas. These men and women have so much love in their heart that they don't know what to do with it. So they accept the job from St. Nicholas and wear the red suit at Christmas time. And the magic is, as you tell him or her what's on your heart, it will rest in their heart until they go to sleep that night. And through their dreams will go straight to St. Nicholas, who flies the sleigh on Christmas morning. Now, it just so happens that every now and then a Santa at the mall has to have a day off. He may catch a cold. He may have to do some Christmas shopping. Or my wife may want him to bathe the dogs or sweep the house. And we can't always find another Santa to take his place. That's when St. Nicholas smiles so big you can't imagine, because he loves to come to the malls at Christmas time just to meet with the children. So if you go up to Santa and his smile seems to be just a little bit brighter, and as you tell him what's on your Christmas list, you feel a warmth of Christmas coming around that you just don't know where it's coming from, but it is absolutely stupendous, and his eyes aren't twinkling. They actually have a sparkle to them. You're probably sitting on the lap of St. Nicholas himself, number one, chief, prime Santa. And what you tell him goes straight to his heart so that he can make your Christmas as bright as possible. But there's a magic to Christmas that you hold inside of your heart. I'm going to tell you two things that you've got to listen to very, very carefully, okay? First is sort of a challenge. How many of you have ever helped somebody just because they were having a problem? How'd you feel when you helped somebody because they were just having a problem? Good. You felt good. That's because you gave part of you to somebody else. You were given that wonderful feeling to say thank you. You can't go to the store and buy that good feeling. You can't go to the mall. It's not walking around looking for a place. Well, actually, it might be looking for a place to be home. It is a special feeling given to you because you gave part of you to help somebody else. That good feeling is called the true magic of Christmas. And you can get it any day of the year just by sharing yourself with somebody else. And to help you remember, Merry Christmas. I'm going to give you these nickels from the North Pole, which remind you how to find Christmas any day of the year. How's that? Now, here's the second part. Every night, especially from now to Christmas, and most importantly on Christmas Eve as you go to bed, I want you to go to your parents, and parents, you make sure that you get this from your kids. Matter of fact, you give your kids a great big hug. And folks, younger folks, you give your parents a great big hug and say, I love you. Because Christmas is not born until you share the love that's in your heart. Okay? If you want a warm Christmas, share the love inside of your heart. And the best person to share it with is your folks, because they definitely need it. And this time when everything's going absolutely crazy and bonkers, we all need a few seconds just to say, thanks. I love you, Mom, Dad. Okie doke. And I hope you all have a tremendously Merry Christmas.